When Daniel first moved into the quiet waterfront neighborhood, he thought he had finally found the place where he could slow down and breathe. The streets were lined with carefully trimmed hedges, the sidewalks spotless, and the houses gleamed with a uniform neatness that seemed straight out of a magazine. For a man who had spent most of his life working long hours and living in cramped apartments, the sight of his own home facing the water felt like a reward he had truly earned. More than the house itself, however, it was the small dock out back. That sealed the deal. From the moment he set eyes on it, he imagined his boat moored there, an old but reliable fishing vessel that had once belonged to his father. It wasn't luxurious, nor was it the kind of sleek yacht that some of his wealthier neighbors preferred. But it carried memories. Summer mornings learning how to tie knots, late afternoons chasing the horizon, and quiet evenings when he and his father had sat side by side, letting the waves rock them gently. To Daniel, the boat wasn't just a possession, it was a legacy. At first, no one seemed to mind. The neighbors waved politely, some even commenting on how quaint his boat looked by the dock. Daniel would rise early on weekends, make himself a thermos of coffee, and head out before sunrise. Those mornings became the best part of his week, the mist curling above the water, the silence broken only by the hum of his engine. For a time, he felt at peace, yet peace in a neighborhood governed by a homeowners association was a fragile thing. The HOA operated like a silent overseer, lurking behind every lawn inspection, every mailbox regulation, every coat of paint. Deemed non-compliant. Daniel had heard whispers from his neighbors about fines for flower beds that didn't conform to the approved color scheme, or reprimands for leaving trash cans visible for too long. He had shrugged those off as overreactions, believing that as long as he kept his yard tidy and paid his dues, he'd remain in good standing. The letter came one unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, slipped neatly into his mailbox with the HOAS emblem printed in bold across the top. At first glance, Daniel thought it was just another reminder about an upcoming community meeting. Instead, it was a formal notice titled, "Non-Compliance, Unauthorized Watercraft Storage." The words that followed carried the heavy, impersonal weight of bureaucracy. According to the HOA, his boat constituted a violation of community standards. The letter cited obscure clauses buried in the covenant documents, phrases like visual uniformity and aesthetic integrity of shared waterfront views. It demanded that the vessel be removed within 10 days, warning of daily fines that would accumulate until he complied. At the bottom was a crisp signature from the HOA president, followed by a reminder that the rules exist to preserve property values for all. Daniel read the letter twice, then a third time, as a slow heat built in his chest. His boat was not some rusty wreck abandoned in the yard. It was seaworthy, well kept, and docked exactly where it belonged. He thought back to the compliments from his neighbors, the smiles and waves as he passed them by on his weekend trips. Was it truly an eyesore, or had a handful of board members simply decided it didn't match their curated vision of perfection? The more he considered it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. The HOA, with its self-appointed guardians of order, wanted to remind everyone who truly held power in the neighborhood. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch, the letter folded neatly in his lap. The sun was sinking behind the trees, painting the water gold, and his boat swayed gently in the fading light. To him, it looked beautiful, timeless, even, but now it had been reduced to nothing more than a violation in the eyes of the association. He thought about his father, about the years of hard work that had led him here, and about the promise he'd made to himself never to let anyone strip away the things that mattered most. A lesser man might have caved, hauling the boat away quietly to avoid conflict. But Daniel felt something stir within him that he hadn't felt in years: defiance. The HOA might have written the rules, but they had underestimated just how far he was willing to go to defend what was his. Weeks passed after the letter arrived, but Daniel never moved his boat. He waited for the next step, fully expecting the HOA to escalate. Sure enough, another notice followed, this time stamped in red. Final warning, when he still refused. To comply, the fines began rolling in $50 per day, calculated with ruthless precision, as if the HOA board members took personal joy in watching the total climb higher. Neighbors began to whisper again, some sympathetic, others shaking their heads and advising him to pick his battles. But Daniel stayed calm. Outwardly, it seemed like he was ignoring the mounting pressure, but in truth he was quietly working on a plan that would turn the board's smug superiority on its head. That plan began with research. Daniel spent evenings poring over public records and local listings, searching for opportunities that most residents wouldn't bother to notice. The marina, located just a few miles down the shoreline, caught his attention almost immediately. It wasn't flashy, but it was functional, a cluster of docks, storage facilities, and service stations that had been serving boat owners in the community for decades. More importantly, it was listed for sale. The aging owners were retiring, ready to hand off the business to whoever could meet their asking price. Daniel knew it wouldn't be cheap, but after years of careful saving and some successful investments, he realized he was in a position to make it happen. And so, while the HOA piled on fines and smugly believed they were wearing him down, Daniel was negotiating behind the scenes to purchase the very lifeline that many of them relied upon. The sale went through quietly at first. Daniel didn't announce it to anyone. He simply let the paperwork process and the signatures finalize. The first hint the HOA came at their next board meeting, when several members began discussing their summer boating plans. For all their rigid enforcement of rules in the neighborhood, many of them owned larger boats far too large to store at their homes without breaking their own regulations. They depended on the marina, paying monthly fees to keep their vessels docked and serviced. That dependence, Daniel realized with satisfaction, gave him the upper hand. The official announcement came one bright Saturday morning. A new sign appeared at the marina entrance. Under new ownership, management by Daniel Pierce. Beneath it, smaller print detailed updates to the policies. At the top of that list, bold and clear, was a rule that stunned the community. Effective immediately. No storage or docking privileges will be granted to current or former HOA board members of Harbor's Edge. The news spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, Daniel's phone was buzzing with calls, some pleading, others furious. The HOA president herself showed up at the marina, red-faced and indignant, demanding that he reconsider. She cited contracts, legal precedent, even attempted to appeal to community spirit. But Daniel, leaning casually against the railing of his dock, reminded her that the marina was private property now. Just as the HOA had its rules to preserve property, values, he had every right to set rules to preserve his peace of mind. Her protests grew shriller, but Daniel didn't waver. He had spent months under their thumb. Now the balance had shifted. For the first time, the HOA felt powerless. Their letters and fines carried no weight at the marina, and with summer fasts approaching, their boats were suddenly homeless. Renting space elsewhere meant long drives and costly fees and inconvenience they had never imagined facing. Meanwhile, Daniel's boat remained right where it had always been, bobbing gently at his private dock, untouched and unbothered. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now approached him with newfound respect, some even laughing quietly about how brilliantly he had turned the tables. To them, Daniel had become something of a legend, the man who stood up to the HOA and won. Yet for Daniel, it wasn't about glory or spite. It was about principle. He had bought the marina not just to make a point, but to protect the freedom that came with his boat, his dock, and his right to live without unnecessary intrusion. That evening, as the sun sank low over the horizon, Daniel took his boat out onto the water. The engine purred beneath him, the waves lapped against the hull, and the wind carried the salty scent of freedom. Behind him, the marina stood firm, a symbol of his victory. Ahead of him stretched open water, endless and untamed. He smiled. Not with arrogance, but with quiet satisfaction. Had thought they could take away his peace. Instead, they had handed him the perfect opportunity to reclaim it, tanned, then some.